Let's start with what nobody is saying out loud. Karolína Muchová walked off the Hard Rock Stadium court on Monday, having just beaten Eala 6-love, 6-2 in exactly 60 minutes. 1 hour. The kind of scoreline that usually ends a conversation before it starts. The kind of result that gets a 2-sentence recap and a footnote. But something happened after that match, something in Muchova's words, in her tone, in the very deliberate way she chose to talk about the girl on the other side of the net, that stopped the tennis world cold. Because Muchova didn't just win. She made sure the world understood what it was watching when Eala stepped onto a court. And that moment, quiet as it was, may end up being one of the most significant things said about Filipino tennis in a generation. So let's talk about it. All of it. The match, the run, the ranking reality, the curse, the praise, and what it all means for a 20-year-old from the Philippines who arrived in Miami this year not as a wild card with nothing to lose, but as a seeded player with everything to prove. Karolína Muchová entered the Miami Open as the 13th seed, ranked 14th in the world, and she had been in electric form all season. She had already won the Doha title, reached her third quarterfinal of 2026, and her season record heading into this match stood at 17 wins and just 3 losses. This is a player who has been everywhere this year. A player who, after years of battling injuries that threatened to derail what had been a remarkable career, had come back with something to say. And on Monday, against Eala, she said it loudly. The match lasted exactly 1 hour. Muchová fired 20 winners against just 11 unforced errors, never faced a single break point, and dropped only 8 points behind her serve across both sets. On paper, it looks like a blowout. On paper, it looks routine. But here is where things get interesting, because Karolína Muchová, a woman who has been to a Roland Garros final, who has stood in US Open semifinals, who has seen every kind of opponent this tour can produce, chose not to speak about herself after that match. She chose to speak about Eala. I just wanted to control the game, Muchová said on Tennis Channel, because I know she can be very dangerous, especially here. She had an amazing result last year, so I just tried to control the game, stay at the baseline, play aggressively, and yeah, it worked pretty well. Read that again slowly. This is a woman who just won 6-love, 6-2, telling the world that she spent her preparation worrying about how dangerous her opponent was. That she built her entire game plan around containing someone ranked outside the top 30. Thus she felt she had to be careful, had to stay controlled, had to stay focused, because she knew what Eala was capable of. You don't say that about a player you take lightly. You don't build a tactical game plan around a name you don't respect. Muchová respected Eala, and she wanted everyone to know it. It felt pretty good, Muchová said with a smile in her on-court interview. I mean, you get nervous here and there when it's going, I don't want to say easy, but when the score is in your favor, you have to be cautious. There it is. Even in command. Even with a 6-love first set in the books. Even racing toward the finish line, Muchová felt nerves. Not because the match was slipping away, it wasn't, but because she understood the player she was dealing with. She understood that Eala is the kind of competitor who, if you give her a single opening, if you drop your guard for a single game, will make you pay. That reputation isn't given out for free in professional tennis. You earn it through performances. And everything Eala had done in Miami in the days before this match had earned her that reputation 100 times over. Let's go back to the beginning of this Miami run, because context is everything here. Eala entered the 2026 Miami Open seeded 31st and ranked 29th in the world, coming in with a first-round bye as a direct result of her stunning run 12 months earlier, when she arrived as a wild card and tore through the draw all the way to the semifinals. Think about that trajectory. 1 year ago, she was nobody's pick. She was a wild card, a curiosity, a story for the Filipino press, and maybe a feel-good moment for the neutral. And then she beat everyone in her path, including Iga Swiatek, and suddenly the world was paying attention. This year, she came in with a target on her back and seeds to defend. That is a completely different kind of pressure and a completely different kind of test. Her first match of the tournament against Laura Siegemund became the longest match of her WTA career, 3 hours and 20 minutes of combat on stadium court. It was a battle that started beautifully and then turned into a war. Eala raced out to a 3-0 lead in the first set, dictating from the baseline with clean, aggressive shot-making, putting the German veteran on the back foot. But Siegmund dug deep, saved break points, got on the board, and broke back to level the set at 3 games all. From that moment, the match became a test of everything Eala had worked on in the off-season. Mental endurance, physical stamina, composure in chaotic situations. Eala had 3 set points at 6-5 and couldn't convert. She had a 4th set point in the tiebreak. Siegmund saved them all before closing out the opener. For a lesser player, that would have been the beginning of the end. Dropped the first set, let points slip, faced a veteran who knew exactly how to grind. The second set could have become a disaster. Instead, it became a statement. Eala came out and raced to a 3-1 lead in the second set. This time, she managed it with more composure, protecting her serve while keeping pressure on the German from the baseline. She broke again in the 9th game and closed it out 6-3 to force a decider. And then she went out and did it again in the 3rd, building a 4-1 lead and holding firm to seal one of the grittiest victories of her career. It definitely was close. Very demanding, physically and mentally, **** Eala said after the match. But that was one of my goals last year after this tournament, to improve physically. And here I am, fresh as a flower, after 3 hours and 20 minutes, after letting 4 set points go, after surviving the relentless experience of a seasoned veteran who has seen every trick this sport has to offer. Fresh as a flower. If you needed one quote to understand what kind of competitor Alex Eala has become, that is the one. That is the mindset that Karolína Muchová was talking about when she said she had to be cautious. A player who comes out of a 3-hour war and says she's fresh as a flower is a player you do not take lightly. And then came Magda Linette. Eala dominated the opening set, sealing it in just 40 minutes against a player who had already stunned Iga Swiatek, the number 2 seed, in the previous round. Think about what Linette was carrying into that match. She had just toppled one of the biggest names in women's tennis. She had momentum, belief, and the crowd's attention. But Eala, having just survived the longest match of her WTA career, found another gear entirely. Linette mounted a strong challenge in the second set, rallying from 1-3 down to take a 4-3 lead and threatening to flip the whole match on its head. The 2 players went to a tiebreak, where Eala surged to a 3-1 advantage and closed it out 7-2, sealing the match after an hour and 48 minutes of action. Clinical. Controlled. Impressive. The kind of win that says, I am not here to make up the numbers. So by the time Eala walked out to face Muchová in the round of 16, she had already won 2 legitimate, pressure-filled matches in a tournament where her ranking points from last year's semifinals were hanging over every single performance. She had fought through 3 hours and 20 minutes against a seasoned veteran. She had managed a high-stakes second set against a player who had just beaten Swiatek. And she had done it all while carrying the weight of expectation that comes from being the most watched player in Filipino sporting history. That is not a small burden. That is not something you switch off between matches. And then she ran into Muchová. And Muchová, it must be said, was different that day. Honestly, today it felt pretty good, Muchová said. I felt like everything I touched went into the court. I tried to be aggressive. It was a good day for me. That is not spin. That is not modesty. That is the truth. Muchová fired 20 winners against just 11 unforced errors, didn't face a break point, and dropped only 8 points behind her serve across the entire match. There are days in this sport where the better player brings their absolute best and the opponent simply cannot compete with it. This was one of those days. The first 10 games went to Muchová without reply, and the possibility of a historic double bagel scoreline was looming before a wild Muchová drive volley sailed meters over the baseline and handed Eala her first hold. That single detail tells you everything about the level Muchová was operating at. It wasn't that Eala had a bad day, it was that Muchová was playing some of the best tennis of her season, on a surface that suits her game, in a tournament where she would go on to reach the quarterfinals. Eala committed 32 total errors, 13 unforced, 19 forced, while managing just 7 winners. When you are forced into that many errors by an opponent, it says less about your limitations and more about the pressure your opponent is generating. Muchova was relentless, aggressive, and precise. And she never, not for a single game, let her foot off the gas. Now here is where the story needs to be told with some honesty. Because a lot of the conversation online is framing the scoreline as somewhat deceptive, suggesting this was a closer match than the numbers indicate, that Eala was genuinely dangerous throughout, that Muchova was nervous, because the match was genuinely tight. That is not quite what happened. The match was not tight. Muchova was dominant from the first game to the last. Her nerves, which she candidly acknowledged, were the nerves of a professional who understands the game well enough to know that no lead is ever completely safe until the final point is played. They were the nerves of a champion staying focused, not the nerves of a player fighting for her life. There is a difference, and that difference matters if we are going to tell Eala's story honestly. But what does not need any reframing or softening is Muchova's praise for Eala. That was genuine. That was honest. And that, in its own way, is more meaningful than any scoreline could be. Muchova explained her strategy clearly. She wanted to control the game because she knew Eala could be very dangerous, especially at this tournament, and that Eala had produced an amazing result there the previous year. That game plan, built specifically around containing one player, around not giving her space, around staying at the baseline and being aggressive so that Eala couldn't find her rhythm, is a form of respect that rankings cannot quantify. Muchova prepared for Alex Eala the way you prepare for a threat. Not a formality, a genuine threat. And that matters because of what comes next. With a round of 16 exit, Eala is expected to endure a significant ranking slide, having defended only a fraction of the 390 points she earned from her Miami semifinals run last year. She arrived at this tournament ranked 29th in the world, a career high. She will leave it lower. That is the brutal mathematics of professional tennis. You reach a semifinal one year, and 12 months later you have to go back and do it all over again just to stay still. Eala went further in this tournament than many expected given the enormous points pressure she was under. But the numbers are unforgiving. The ranking will drop. The questions will come. But here is what the ranking cannot measure. Alex Eala has still not beaten a Czech player on the WTA Tour since turning professional. The record stands at 0 wins and 13 losses against Czech opponents. That is a curious and stubborn statistical reality, and it is one that will follow her into every future conversation involving Czech players. Linda Noskova ended her Indian Wells run just weeks ago. Now Muchova in Miami. The Czech players have found something in Eala's game, or perhaps Eala simply has not yet found the right solution against their particular style. The heavy ground strokes, the varied pace, the crafty angles that disrupt rhythm and expose footwork. Whatever the root cause, this is a puzzle that needs solving, and it is one that Eala and her team are surely already deep in the process of addressing. What cannot be disputed, however, is the scale of what she has accomplished in the broader arc of this spring. 2 weeks ago in Indian Wells, she reached the 3rd round before being stopped. Now in Miami, she has backed that up with back-to-back 4th-round appearances at this specific WTA 1000 event, the same tournament where, 12 months ago, she announced herself to the world. And despite the loss to Muchova, Eala actually moved 3 spots up the WTA singles rankings after reaching the round of 16 in Miami. Even in defeat, she gained ground. Even in a 6-0, 6-2 loss to a player operating at near-peak level, she came away with more than she arrived with. That is the definition of a rising player. What Karolína Muchová did with her words after this match is something that happens rarely in professional tennis. Top players are notoriously guarded in their post-match interviews. They praise opponents when they lose, they thank the crowd when they win, and they say the right things without ever saying anything particularly meaningful. Muchová broke that pattern. She went out of her way on Tennis Channel, in her on-court interview, in every exchange she had about this match, to make clear that Alex Eala is a player who demands your full attention and your best tennis. She said she prepared specifically around the threat Eala poses. She said the crowd, the tournament, and last year's results all factored into her mindset heading into this match. She said she felt nervous even while winning comfortably, because that is the effect this 20-year-old Filipino girl has on players who understand tennis at the highest level. Think about what that means for Eala's future opponents. They have now heard Karolína Muchová, a player with a Grand Slam final and multiple major semifinals on her resume, a player with a 17-3 season record in 2026, a player who dominated this match as completely as the scoreline suggests, say that she had to be careful, that she had to have a specific plan, that she felt pressure. Every player who draws Eala in the next tournament will have heard those words. They will have seen that acknowledgement, and they will come in knowing that they cannot take a single point for granted. That is what Muchová gave Alex Eala with her post-match comments. Not just a kind word, not just the usual sportsmanship platitude. She handed her a reputation. The reputation of a player who makes established stars nervous, who forces top 15 competitors to build tactical game plans around containing her, who is talked about not as a feel-good story, not as a wild card who got lucky for a tournament, but as a genuine force that the WTA has to take seriously. Meanwhile, Muchová herself moves on to the quarterfinals as one of the most dangerous players remaining in the draw. Her momentum is real. Her season is historic. And she goes forward as one of the legitimate favorites in the bottom half of the bracket. But she made sure, before she did, that the conversation didn't end with her victory alone. For Eala, the work now begins in a different way. The ranking will reset. The points will need to be rebuilt. The loss to Muchová will be studied and processed and filed away as evidence of where the gaps still exist between where she is and where she wants to be. The Czech puzzle needs solving. The transition between grinding physical battles and high-paced technical matches against elite ball strikers needs more work. These are the realities of being a 20-year-old player competing at the very top of the sport. They are not failures. They're data points. They are the raw material from which the next chapter gets written.